This reading is by Ada Limon, and it's called A New National Anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. Too high for most of us with the rocket's red glare, and then there are the bombs. Always, always there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at a homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key, but the song didn't mean anything. Just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could slave the hireling and the slave. Perhaps the truth is every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal snaking underneath us as we blindly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong. I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything. When it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance. A song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned. That song that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave. The song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones. And isn't that enough? My sermon today is based on this reading. Perhaps, Ada Limon wrote, the truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza. Something brutal snaking underneath us as we blindly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. I guess I never thought about the national anthem having more verses. It seems like one of those facts that I probably knew once, something I learned in fifth grade history and then promptly forgot. This is particularly embarrassing given that I grew up in Frederick, Maryland, whose primary claim to fame is that it is where Francis Scott Key, author of the national anthem, lived. Everything from the mall to schools to baseball teams are named after him. The story goes that Francis Scott Key witnessed the British attack on Fort McHenry in Baltimore during the War of 1812. He was so inspired when he saw the flag the next day still flying over the fort that he sat down and wrote the words to what has become our national anthem. This is the most I ever learned about Key, or as much as I remember, in spite of living in the very town he lived in and driving past his law office on a nearly daily basis. I didn't know that he enslaved people beginning in 1800, and that abolitionists at the time were already correcting his wording, citing America as not the land of the free and the home of the brave, but the land of the free and the home of the oppressed. As district attorney, Key was anti-abolition. In fact, he was a leader of the American Colonization Society, also called the Society for the Colonization of Free People of Color of America. This society advocated for people of African descent to be returned to Africa. Intended to preserve slavery in the United States, this society was formed to prevent the integration of African people into the US and to prevent free Black people from assisting those enslaved in gaining their freedom. So given that background, it's not surprising that Key had a third stanza expressing his views, is it? Verse 3 goes, "No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." While we're on the topic, the fourth stanza isn't great either. It starts, "Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation. Best with victory and peace may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation." Aside from the American exceptionalism here, that first line, "Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand," is clearly talking to white people and intends to be exclusionary. The truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza. Something brutal snaking underneath us as we blindly sing the high notes. Now, interestingly, Francis Scott Key had a sister who was married to Frederick, Maryland's other claim to fame, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. My mother and I served as docents of the Chief Justice Roger B. Taney House for several years in my adolescence. This house was not actually a hotspot for tourists, so mostly this meant that I spent Saturdays dressed in an awkward, not at all time period appropriate blouse and a long skirt, sitting and waiting in the unair-conditioned house, or sitting out back where the people Taney enslaved lived. At that time, I was between 12 and 14. I was fascinated with the how of life back then. I memorized the script and did some additional research to learn about all the items in the house and how they were used. People asked questions about what things were. They wanted to know about how the ropes on the bed were tightened. They wanted to know about the cooking items and what was in the mattresses. Tourists wanted to know if the floors, if the wallpaper were original, what Taney himself might have touched. They wanted to know more about what Frederick was like then, and I had fun factoids to share about the architecture and activities done in the parlor and which other famous people visited. But what I don't remember, beyond a passing mention in the framing of who Taney was, I don't remember talking about what made Taney famous. I don't remember, beyond a passing mention, talking about the fact that Taney was responsible for the Dred Scott decision in 1857. I'm sure I mentioned it, but I don't remember talking about the fact that we were standing in the home of a slave owner who was responsible for ruling that people of African descent, quote, "are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution." His ruling continued, stating that Black people in this country, quote, "can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which the Constitution provides for and secures to citizens of the United States." Every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal snaking underneath us. It's uncomfortable to tell this story. Looking back now, I wonder how it was possible for me to be in that house, to tell the story of the people who lived there, and to not have the weight of his cruelty crush me. The weight of this story didn't actually land for me until far too recently, until I was in seminary, actually, until I began listening to all the unsung third stanzas some of us have the privilege of believing are buried deep in our country's past. Until I began listening to all the unsung third stanzas some of us believe are actually history. The weight of this story did not register for me really until I realized those stanzas are buried like any toxin is buried. They're not discussed, yet they continue to poison us all. There's so much being said right now about how we live honestly with our past and our present. And in that, I'm seeing a lot of conversations about cancel culture. I want to be clear that changing the way we remember our history, changing whose voices we center, changing who is celebrated and how they're celebrated, this is not an attempt to bury those verses. Rather, this is how we learn to remember in new ways that do not perpetuate the same stories that continue to cause harm. Changing the way we remember, remembering the truth of white supremacy culture and the truth of our country is how we write a new national anthem. I recently saw information about Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. Their picture on Facebook said, "Why we don't allow weddings," over a picture of a gorgeous big house that I'm certain on first glance would be someone's ideal wedding location. The text next to the picture read, "Over 350 people were enslaved at Whitney Plantation throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Our tour has always focused on the brutal labor and stolen freedom of those that created vast economic wealth for the enslaving families. We do not glamorize the big house or the grounds. In addition to our mission to educate visitors in the larger community about slavery and its legacies, our site is a place of memory and reverence. For these reasons, the big house has never been nor ever will be a wedding venue. Plantations are sites of immense cruelty and violence. We do not allow any event that would overshadow this reality and disrespect the memory of all those who suffered, labored, and died here." That unsung third stanza of our national anthem tells a story that needs to be told. The story of the harm of white supremacy in our country is one that needs to be told again and again because it thrives in the shadows where it currently lives. So perhaps what Whitney Plantation is doing is teaching us how to sing that third verse. We don't bury the pain. We don't name malls after it, send our children to high schools bearing its name, root for the baseball team with that pain as its mascot. We sing that third stanza and we change the melody so we can carry the weight of it. We make space for the holy naming of trauma and grief. I think now about my experiences at the Tani House, and I wonder what it would have been like as a teenager if my attention had been turned not to items and factoids, but if I had been forced to reconcile what it meant for me as a white teenager to be giving tours of a living space of enslaved people. People enslaved by people who looked like me. Back then, I was taught Tani was a man of his time, and Key's lyrics just reflect the antiquated thought of that time period. But what might be different if I had been forced to really wrestle with the fact that there were white people arguing with Tani and Key, declaring them to be immoral and wrong? What if I heard the stories we have lost, the stories of the people who were enslaved there? What if their voices had not been lost to history, and if I told their stories in that house, instead of only the voice of the oppressors? I wonder how today might be different if 13-year-old me had written a new script for the Tani House. What if I did not just sing that old first verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, the one of pride and love of a country, and the tired story of Tawny being a man of his time? What if I didn't ignore the third stanza, but I didn't write it either? What if instead I had written a lyric that said, this is not a historical landmark. This is a place of grieving. This is a place where a cruel man lived. A man that made a decision that upheld cruelty and harm. This is a place of national shame. What would happen if the house was not part of the tour? Because we know that continuing to profit from and spectate at houses of perpetrators of pain and violence continues to perpetuate the suffering, pain, and violence. What if the outside quarters where the enslaved people lived was a memorial to the people who suffered at the hands of people who looked like me? What if there we lit candles and opened space for grief, allowing ourselves to sing the actual unsung third stanza, the one of the pain and harm of white supremacy culture that harms all of us, then and now? Ada Limon continues in her poem, "Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything when it's not a weapon. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag." Frederick Douglass addressed the Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society of Rochester, New York on July 5th in 1852. He wrote, "I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" In that, I hear that Douglass knew that the 4th of July embodied the promise of America. Just as it did then, this holiday holds all the hopes, dreams, and ideals of everything we could be. We can love that vision of the flag. That is not wrong. And this holiday is also a reminder of the way America has never lived up to its promise. Still, thinking we can cancel our history or erase people from it is magical thinking. We keep singing that third stanza, even if we don't know the words. And we're still singing it because we haven't yet written an alternative verse. We are still singing it because white supremacy is still the law of this land. I've been thinking about the image of a humbled American flag for the past few weeks. There is still promise in this American democratic experiment, and I believe that promise lives there still. I believe this promise lies in the minds, lives, bodies, and dreams of Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, disabled Americans, those who are undocumented, those who immigrated to this country carrying the hope of what this country can be. It's time to write lyrics with those voices. It's time to sing a new national anthem of freedom and liberation. And I believe we can. We can sing a new song. In fact, there are those among us who have always been singing that song of what America could be and what America should be. I trust them to continue holding this dream and leading us into the future. I believe those of us who are white can learn to listen. We can learn to harmonize. If we whisper gently at each other's backs, urging one another on through the times it gets hard, I believe we can learn. We don't need to cancel the flag. We don't need to cancel the national anthem. We can hold it, as the poem states, until we can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods. And so we write new words, and they will be wrong. And we will listen to one another, and we will write new words and new tunes, and we will try again, singing off key and attempted harmony in rough verses, in rough voices, unpracticed and raw, until we're singing the song that's our birthright. The one that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on. It sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's. It sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave. The song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are mine. This song, the one that is the promise of an anti-racist, just and humbled America, is enough. You are mine, and I am yours, and it is enough. Together, we can create a world where we know the old third stanza and we keep it under glass in a museum that we gather around to remember and to mourn. As together, we write a new national anthem that will shape and create and recreate our way into a new future.